Samantha, let me ask you something. Because we're taping this at the Holocaust Museum, one of the great debates that still rages about the Holocaust itself was, should the Allies, should the United States have bombed the rail lines leading into Auschwitz? And that leads in subsequent discussions of subsequent genocides to some, perhaps it's a misconception, and I want you to tell me if it is, that the United States doesn't really need to rely on NATO or the United Nations, but the United States personally itself can take action, direct military action to negate what the government in Khartoum is doing and what the Janjaweed are doing. Is that true, or is that a complete misconception that just, for example, by aerial power, that we could intervene to make a real difference?
No, I mean, I think that one has to be very careful. Every intervention, when one is talking about military intervention, is a cost-benefit analysis, and it's the costs and benefits to the people whose lives that you're contemplating trying to save. It's cost-benefit in terms of American lives. It's cost-benefit to international law, to regional stability, to the rest of Sudan, to the North-South agreement. I mean, there's so many elements, and sadly, this cost-benefit analysis wasn't done adequately on enough axes with regard to the war in Iraq. Had you done that kind of analysis with regard to Rwanda, I think it would have cut very much in favor of acting, given the risks, given the kind of international consensus you might have been able to muster. But Rwanda happened, of course, very, very quickly. What I find very disturbing in a way about our kind of hum-de-dum discussion and even the President's very welcome remarks is the idea that now we're talking about a bridging force, and we're talking about a very disciplined, short-term engagement, in order to support the African Union, in order to hand off to the United Nations. And we've been having this kind of conversation now for going on 3 years. People are still dying. The conflict has now spread over into Chad. Fine that the engagement has to be limited, but who is going to staff this United Nations protection force? We want to export the hazard. We in the United States, we as a sort of group of public intellectuals, yammering on a Monday night about what should be going on in Darfur, but who is actually going to comprise that force? Ambassador Randenberger talked about going to the usual suspects, making the African Union the backbone of that force. Well, those usual suspects, the Nepalese, the Bangladeshis, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Ghanaians, the South Africans, the Senegalese, these are the kinds of countries we're talking about asking to come and do this kind of work. Well, they're active already in peacekeeping around the world. There's 75,000 of them doing this kind of humanitarian work. When are the Europeans actually going to step up and stop simply, taking our security umbrella, not spending any money on policing or on kind of ramping up their own services so they could actually perform these kinds of roles? And Mudawi, while I agree with you totally that we need to create a space for these communities to come back together and that's the only long-term solution for this place, if you go into those camps and you talk to those people about what they want, they would love to talk to the Arabs who are attacking them eventually, but only when they feel that they're not going to be attacked when those talks occur. And there is a desperation for an outside presence, and even sadly for a non-African presence, on a logic that while the Africans can do what they have done, there is a need for much more mobility and much better training and much greater numbers.
But aside from logistics and military, you actually think that white men with blue helmets can actually serve as a positive influence here, and that they won't be resented purely by virtue of the fact that they're Europeans?
Well, you've got to get the diplomacy right. I mean, part of what the United States has to be doing, in addition to denouncing and talking about the need for other countries to go and put their troops in harm's way, is peeling away Sudan's allies. And this gets to Mudawi's point. Peeling away the support they've been getting from the Chinese and even from some African governments, peeling away members of the Arab League, launching a joint fact-finding mission where you bring the Egyptian foreign minister with the Jordanian foreign minister together with Secretary Rice, into the conflict to try to enlist support for a much larger force. I mean, all those countries are saying they want peace in Darfur, so using their own words against them and saying, look, we all have an interest in having a thicker, much more robust force, creating the conditions by which, these communities can actually interact, both in Abuja and, at a grassroots level.
This Thursday,
I think the presence, even the presence of the humanitarian workers in the camps is enough. It's a protection.
Why are they still being attacked?
Are the aid workers protected?
If we can force the Sudanese government not to
keep killing, right? And how do you do that? What is the step?
That is the pressure you have to do. That is a
No,
pressure.
Madame,
that
I
community.
was in a camp in Dali in North Darfur near Tawila, and 18,000 people were there in September, and it was completely abandoned. The aid workers had left because it had been attacked. In that case, it was attacked. Sometimes there are attacks by rebel groups, but in this case, they'd been attacked by Janjaweed and by government of Sudan police, and the African Union that was nearby had no arms. They were unable to protect, and so the people all left. So the aid workers left as well. That's happening all across the region.
It's important to keep in mind that the actions that have been taken, and I think in this discussion it conveys the perception that somehow the situation is every bit exactly as bad as it was. The situation has changed. In 2004, there were 100 humanitarian workers on the ground. There are now 14,000. Malnutrition rates have been cut in half. The mortality rate, according to the latest World Health Organization study, is less than international crisis levels. That's not to say the situation is not horrendous.
You said a genocide was still occurring.
It is horrendous. And the
Is a
reason
genocide occurring?
It is occurring.
We should be speaking about it with
here's
greater
why
urgency.
it's occurring. Killing is going on. Rapes are continuing. 3.5 million people are affected by the conflict. And these African tribes are being targeted. Yes, it is still genocide. What I'm saying is that the actions that have been taken have not been totally impotent. Things have happened. Have we just discovered the UN? No. We've been talking about this for quite some time. And in terms of isolating Khartoum, I think we've done a fairly good job of it. Remember, President Bashir was deprived of the African Union presidency. And believe me, that was largely our handiwork.
Michael, how